Welcome into Browns Film Breakdown. I'm your host, Jake Burns. It is the April 18th edition of the show. Happy to have you guys here on this Friday. We have a good show lined up for you, some great guests. Some guys from the Bengals and the Steelers are going to join us to talk through some of their draft plans, as I do like to get a look around the AFC North at what teams have done and what they're looking to do with their drafts. I do think it helps us understand the division, first of all, and then obviously some teams in the division are going to have picks that matter to what the Browns ultimately get to at pick 33. Before we get to that, we do have some good stuff at the site. We have Cody Sook's trade up article, which I think is really well done, looking at the four most likely spots the Browns could trade up from 33 to get back into the first round, with the ever popular idea that they might go get a quarterback at some point after they take Travis Hunter. So we'll see about that. That's a lot of information in there. There's a lot of probabilities in there, what it will actually take in a realistic nature to go up to 15 or maybe just one spot to 32. Really well done. Check that out. We're going to have some exciting stuff over the next week where we're doing some community-based mock drafts, which are really fun, where we get everybody involved, do 32 teams, probably going to do a couple rounds, look at what that looks like, see if we can get predictive with that. So we'll have people on the website, subscribers, join us for that, pick a team and draft for them. We're excited about that. We're going to have some really quality guests leading up to the draft, and then we're going to go live during each day of the draft as well, which will be a ton of fun to join you guys on YouTube and talk through the draft and what the Browns do and what the rest of the NFL is doing around a very interesting NFL draft. So today's show, like I said, some really great stuff coming. I want to remind you how to support brownsfilmbreakdown.com. Obviously, come join us. We got some great opportunities in membership. We got a founders channel that gets you a free Browns Film Breakdown hat. You obviously get that Slack channel for constant communication, back and forth, exclusive opportunities there. But then you can also just join us at a regular level that involves access to everything on the site, and then gets you some really good behind-the-scenes stuff as well in the community chat, which I think is really awesome and moves in a great direction every day. So come over, support us. We appreciate that. That helps drive the content we make. If you are just listening on the audio side, Apple or Spotify, 5 stars and maybe a written review would help more Browns fans find us. And if you're listening to this on the YouTube version, thumbs up, subscription there helps as well. But really, come join us. If you're watching this, you're listening to it, come over and join us. You won't regret it. It'll enhance your Browns experience. We're appealing to those who love the Browns at a deeper level and want to understand everything going on behind the scenes, the schemes, the salary cap, the decisions this team is making. We're covering it all. We're talking about it all, and it's a great place to be. Without holding us up anymore, I do want to get over to our first guest today, which is going to be Jake Liscow of Locked On Bengals, who does great work covering the Bengals. I think he's one of the best doing it on that side of things. And listen, it's a busy sort of offseason for the Bengals. As we know, they had a lot of stuff going on with their ability to keep the guys around that organization they wanted to keep around. They obviously got the big wide receiver contracts done. There's Trey Hendrickson looming. They lost some interior offensive linemen. They lost Mike Hilton. How are they replacing those guys in the secondary? Von Bell, Sam Hubbard at edge. Are they looking interior? What are they trying to do? They got a good number of picks. They only don't have their 7th rounders, so they're 21st in draft capital, picks 17, 49, 31, 80, or sorry, excuse me. So 17, 49, 81, 119, 153, 193. So 6 picks for them. They're kind of interested in maybe trading as well. We're going to talk about all of that, all the offseason with Jake. Let's get over to that right now. All right, Jake, let's go. Locked On Bengals. You've heard me talk about this as the crossover show that is worth your time. Anytime we get Jake's time, love to have it. And if you're looking for insight on AFC North teams who want Bengals stuff, that's the place to go. And you guys in Cincinnati have 17, 49, and 81. Some good picks to be had, some good players to be had. Exciting names, but names that I know Browns fans sort of dealing with 2 and 33 are not all too familiar with. So I am interested in getting your opinion on those guys. Start with this, though, for me, Jake. It's been a interesting offseason of money spent. Wide receivers. Talk about like what the bigger moves that have happened, not just T and Jamar, but also maybe some surprises or things of that nature that have led up to this point.
T and Jamar obviously dominated headlines for everybody else, where we kind of expected both of those to happen. Not necessarily when they happened. The Bengals were a little bit faster on those moves than they could have been. Often these sorts of things for the Bengals take well into the summer, but a little bit slower than they should have been, meaning by years or by days. They could have gotten these deals done before free agency in 2025. They could have gotten these deals done in 2024. They could have gotten T. Higgins done even before that, before they ended up having him play on the franchise tag, before they franchise tagged him a second time, which in this case, I truly believe 100% was only put into place to give them time to get that deal done without T getting to the open market. He wanted to stay in Cincinnati. The Bengals, as soon as he changed his agent, realized that was possible, and they got that done. So obviously that's a big story from the outside looking in. From my perspective, since I expected those things to happen, I'm disappointed with where they're at with Trey Hendrickson and that still being up in the air. I'm disappointed with the glaring hole at guard on the team. The few defenders that have been signed, Oren Burks and TJ Slayton, and the return of BJ Hill. And I don't have anything against any of those individual players. I think that they all are moves that make sense in their respective vacuums, but there's no impact player there. You're still, with Trey Hendrickson being up in the air, looking at a group that desperately needs an injection of pass rush help on defense. And then on offense, yeah, you keep your weapons. That's great. That's awesome. It's not something that I'm trying to downplay. But if they had also signed a guard that you felt good about, whether it's a younger guy that got big money or one of the veterans that's still out there, maybe a guy with a question mark that they feel good about, like a Will Hernandez type player, or of guys still out there, Dalton Reisner certainly stands out. You have one of those guys on the roster right now. Boy, does it feel different when you think about what the Bengals can do with their first 3 picks. It can open up the world of possibilities to include guys like Colston Loveland, who right now, I don't think the Bengals can even really think about taking at pick 17.
Yeah, there's some connection folks are trying to make, it seems, between selecting, those non-premium positions. I know you would agree with me, a little bit too early. And this is me loosely, again, paying attention to some names. And, I think between you and Joe Goodberry and some of the others that I try to follow along peripherally and take a look at, it's an interesting setup between what's available at 17 and what is the most conducive pick for making this the best spot for now and later. You don't want to pick for now. You also want to keep an eye on the moving target of what's coming down the line. And I think you can get a little tossed around in that at times and trying to find that balance. But talk to us about 17. First, I'll ask you this question. Do you think there's a move up or move down desire going on there? Do you think that they are going to enjoy? I know it's hard to predict, but it's also a spot where this is a draft where a lot of people are talking starters, not stars, and it's just an interesting spot. So what's the latest you hear around that spot?
The Bengals, I think, would probably love to move back in an ideal world and add a 3rd-round pick, or if they go back far enough, maybe even a 2nd-round pick, although I don't think that moving back that far behooves them. There are a bunch of players, I think, in that like 10 to 30 range this year that are all kind of going to be very closely clustered on a lot of teams' boards. I agree with you there in the starters, not stars conversation, but there are a handful of players that I think, and I just did a podcast with Joe Goodberry on this on Locked On Bengals, really make sense for them at 17 if they choose not to move back. I don't think there's a move up coming. I don't know who they'd be moving up for. It would be like if Mason Graham falls or Will Campbell falls and those guys get into the early teens or early tens. Maybe that is somewhat tempting, but they already only have 6 picks. And so in a year where I think they need extra picks, and who doesn't, right? I don't think will be very incentivized to move up. Move back? Sure. This is a team, though, that does not come close to approximating what Howie Roseman does in terms of accumulating draft capital, or even the Browns' adeptness in acquiring draft capital and being willing to move around and play that game. Not something the Bengals do a whole lot of. You can point to a couple of examples in their history, but not something that seems like something they're comfortable with doing on a regular basis, let's say. So I wouldn't expect a trade so much as there's a world of guys that to me make sense at 17. And if they're available, I think that could be a difficult decision if they're all available for the Bengals to pick from. And then you have to consider, what can you get later and play that game of like, where's the value? If I take a guard in the 1st round or a tackle/guard in the 1st round, what then do I miss out on versus if I take a defensive tackle in the 1st round? Is there a guard prospect or tackle/guard prospect that I really like in the 2nd round that I think isn't too much of a step down? And then you get into those value proposition questions for this team.
Let me ask you this. Is there a position that, as you guys have looked at this and you look at the roster and you've kind of, and I know this is habitual for me on the Brown side of like, you kind of find yourself picking positions again, looking at the depth chart, like they need this, but I find myself always taking a tight end here or a running back here. I know you got like this, the contract happened with Mike Gesicki. I know there's some other names and spots that look like they're adequate to above average to good, but is there a spot where you are like, okay, if Tyler Warren somehow falls, the tight end, or is there a DB that you think falls that would be interesting to them? Do you think that those are still things they're looking at, or do you feel like based on what you said about guard, what you think about edge rusher or defensive tackle, that it's just hard to see them reaching outside of those boundaries?
I think you can see them pick at safety in the first
Okay.
round. I think that
Okay.
Malachi Starks and Nick Worry, depending on what their flavor is, are both potentially in play. My personal preference there is Malachi Starks, despite the athletic testing and those things. The disparity between those two players in athletic testing is about as big as it can get for players you're considering in the first round. But they're still trying to replace Jesse Bates. That's a mistake that, like not having a real guard on the roster right now, is haunting them in this draft. And they want to improve upon Geno Stone, we think, but Geno Stone is still on the team. So how much pressure does that alleviate as far as their feeling like they need to force a safety? I don't know. But I do think that they like Malachi Starks. I think that that's a guy that would be in consideration there. I have a harder time with tight end. Tyler Warren, I think it would be extremely tempting because he can do everything, right? It's not like Colston Loveland where you're still projecting a little bit as a blocker, but Colston Loveland also would be tempting. But when they don't have a starting guard on the roster, period, and have this desperate need for some kind of pass rush help or a defensive star, and starters, not stars, yes, but Jahad Campbell could be a star, in my opinion. And maybe one of these safeties could develop into a star at that position. And maybe not. There flaws with both of those profiles, but Jahad Campbell is a profile that looks like he can certainly be a star. Nick Worry's profile suggests that there's some upside there if you have the right role for him in the NFL. So when you get outside of the guard and defensive line conversation, those are the guys that come to mind to me for the most part, is the safeties and Jahad Campbell. Their own questions there, right? As far as the injury for Jahad Campbell, the incomplete athletic profile for Worry, we didn't get the agility testing, and there's a bit of a projection for him as far as where he fits into an NFL defense, in my opinion. And then Malachi Starks with the poor athletic testing and contrasting really good GPS data and not taking, I guess, the step that was expected of him in 2024. Those are the other guys in the conversation, but the guys that make the most sense are Kelvin Banks Jr., if he is available, and then, of course, Walter Nolan and Derek Harmon are the two defensive tackles that stand out to me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to kind of throw at you. Derek Harmon is who Dane Brugler takes in his latest mock at 17, and I think he takes Landon Jackson, I think, out of Arkansas later there for you guys. So yeah, you kind of pinned in a lot of names that would be good. Is there anybody? A couple questions before we go. Anybody that you are like, do not? If they take him at 17, this should just be a big miss for me.
The edge rushers with productivity questions are guys that we don't believe in. The model that we use does not see the justification for taking in the first round of Michael Williams or Shamar Stewart or even a Jalen Walker, like all of those guys. Not that I expect Jalen Walker to necessarily be available there. Those are guys that, for production reasons, it's the Bengals have Miles Murphy on the team, right? And
Right.
that has not gone great. Taking another guy that needs to develop and come into his own and refine traits is not something that's very appealing right now. Maybe that's knee-jerk. There are certain fan bases that I know would love to have Shamar Stewart. I don't think the Bengals fan base is one of those. At the same time, there are reasons to be skeptical that if, for example, a Mike Green and James Pierce character flags did clear, that those guys would even be good fits. When you have Trey Hendrickson on the team, you just lost Sam Hubbard, and you're talking about going to a 250-pound, going to get washed down inside by a tight end edge rusher. So it does, in my opinion, become quite challenging to find a perfect edge rusher fit in the first round for the Bengals, although Mike Green, if his character stuff is cleared, is in the conversation, I think, for me to a greater extent. The other one that might be a surprise to some people, depending on your school of thought, is Tyler Booker. who on tape looks like a very solid guard prospect, but doesn't move like a top end athlete and obviously didn't test like a top end athlete. And for those reasons, the overall expectation for Booker in the NFL is tempered quite a bit because that is a position where you want that high end athleticism and movement ability. And I'm sick, quite frankly, of watching Bengals guards get beat across their face as soon as the ball is snapped. And then there's pressure in Joe Burrow's lap because Ted Karras has uh, gone the other way. And the guard that was on an island just gives up a pressure within, a half second. And so a little bit of athleticism there, a little bit of quick change of direction in a phone booth is something that is currently a desired trait for me when considering the next Bengals guard.
Yeah, I love those tackles that move down to guard. That's always so much more appealing. So listen, on the way out the door, great stuff, man. We appreciate it. Give me your two guys that if you could take kind of the ranges, you've mocked these things out. You've done 1,000 of these, I'm sure. We've tried all those. Seems like there's 14 different simulators on the market this year. Give me your two that you hope they come away with at both the first and second round.
It's one of those choose your adventure things, right? Because you can talk me into Kelvin Banks and someone in the second round. And Kelvin Banks seems like an ideal first round pick. But then I come back to, if we're talking ideal scenario, I believe in Tate Ratledge as a starting or better guard in the NFL with great athleticism. And even if it's not Tate Ratledge, there are a couple of other guys in the second round. So that takes me back to Derek Harmon in the first round is very disruptive, penetrating, large man. He's not doing it at like 280 or 285. He's doing it at 310, moving really well, productive at a young age. If he could tackle, I think he would probably be seen as a top 10 pick. And so whether or not he ever develops that ability to more consistently finish in the NFL would obviously be the question for Harmon. But the skill set overall and the ability to play that way against the pass while you play that way against the run and have the traits to play run defense at a high level as well takes me back to Harmon in the first round. But if it was Walter Nolan, I wouldn't be upset either. And then if you come back in the second round and you're able to scoop up a Tate Ratledge or say a Donovan Jackson or say, I don't think Josh Connerly gets there, but Josh Connerly looks like a guy that we think can play guard as well. Those would be the top two rounds. And that could also be different. I would be down with Dane Brugler's 1 and 2 if you're telling me I could get Jonas Savaitanaya in the third round, but that seems pretty doubtful at this point.
Yeah, listen, looks like the Bengals are looking on O-line, D-line. Derek Harmon, a hell of a football player, will be tough to block. So I would not be a fan of that personally. But yeah, this is the focus, but they could also, like Jake has noted, look around and maybe tight end safety too. So we'll keep our eye on that. We appreciate
I don't
you,
know
Jake.
about tight end. I would say running back at some point, though. Tight
Okay,
end,
running back, sneaky. That's the one.
Thinking
Okay.
about. But running back, I think, will be the sneaky one.
I mean, everybody wants a running back in this class, it seems like, with the shape of things. So
and they could use the extra player there. Like if they do lose Chase Brown, all you have is Samaje Perine. So having some other player with some talent there. But where it fits in is very challenging. They've met with a lot of running backs that will be drafted on day 2. I don't know if they'll be able to pull the trigger there.
That's going to be a busy, man. The round 2, 3 running back run is going to be wild. So listen again, man, great insights, Jake. Locked On Bengals. You'll find it every day. You won't find a better one on the market. So we appreciate your time, Jake. And thanks again, man.
Appreciate it.
All right, let's get over now to our Steelers guest who is doing some great content. Derek Bell's his name, does great stuff. He covers the Steelers as well as anybody at Steelers_DB. Really unbiased view at what they do, why they do it, how they do it over there. He's listen, this is a great interview. We talk about everything around the quarterback with Aaron Rodgers, what's going on there. The big trade for DK Metcalf, took a second rounder from him, but ultimately you need that wide receiver. They feel like they found one. They have picks 21, 83, 123, 156, 185, and 229. That's 30th in draft capital, but that's largely because you give up your second rounder, you give that contract to DK. But they are a little weak on the defensive interior. They do have some questions, maybe at one of the guards. They've done a nice job with the offensive line, but maybe a guard they're looking at. Maybe a running back. You lose Najee Harris. That's an interesting element. Or maybe something in the secondary to spice up what they did with Darius Slay, Joey Porter Jr. coming into his own. But there's some spots that they might look to replace there too as well. So we're talking about all of it. Going to cover some of their connections to guys they bring in for visits, and ultimately, are they going to take a quarterback at 21? They like Shador enough? Do they like Jackson Dart? What his feel for all of that is? So great interview with Derek. Let's get over to that right now. All right, around the division we go. Now we shift to Pittsburgh. Derek is nice enough to join us, go through the Steelers offseason, largely like the Browns, sort of with the quarterback dynamic has been strange, but there's other parts of the team that have shifted. And if you can walk us through, Derek, like what this has looked like, how they've reshaped it a little bit, and sort of bigger things that are looming ahead of the draft here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the big splash trade, DK Metcalf coming over from Seattle. They traded their second round pick for him and subsequently give him a huge extension. One of the bigger moves really in franchise history, just from, an investment standpoint. But they struck out all last offseason in their pursuit of another wide receiver. They get one in Metcalf. And then, like, really the only other really notable move that they made, they signed Darius Slay from Philly on a 1-year deal to kind of be a stopgap option. That's typically what they like to do with the cornerback position opposite Joey Porter Jr. So they've still got some other holes that they need to fill in on the draft. They still probably need a starter along the defensive line with Larry Ogunjobi gone. He goes to Buffalo. So they need another starter on the defensive line. The quarterback situation is still very much in flux. We're all waiting on Aaron Rodgers still. So, quarterback, defensive tackle, and then I would say running back is another one. When Najee Harris headed to LA, they probably want to find a good complement for Jaylen Warren, considering like his workload recently.
Yeah, so a lot of moving parts there, a lot of interesting pieces. The Aaron Rodgers thing kind of drags into today. It feels like he's still talking to Pat McAfee about he's undecided. Like, Is your vibe they're willing to wait on him regardless? And they're going to, because a decision of a 1 year for him does not stop them from doing anything here with a guy they like. But is the vibe like it's going to work itself out, or is it still very much coin flip material?
Everybody that I've talked to seems like, they're still pretty optimistic that it's going to get done. I think the closer to the draft, it makes me a little bit more nervous that it may give the Steelers organization some, whether it's real, whether it's fake, some pressure to take a quarterback earlier than maybe we would have anticipated earlier in the process. So that's the thing is, they have done a lot of work on this quarterback class. They went to the pro days of guys like Will Howard, even like Quentin Ewers. They've had Jackson Dart, Shedeur Sanders. They went to the pro day for Jalen Milroe, took him out to dinner beforehand. So there's been a lot of connection to this draft class. So they're going to take a quarterback. It's just a matter of when. And I think that I speak for probably all of like Steelers Nation. It's just people are begging them to not reach for another quarterback in the first round and overdraft somebody by a couple rounds again, like they did in 2022 when they felt really desperate to kind of find the solution at that spot.
Totally get it, man. Totally get it. So it looks like, again, you said second rounder goes to the DK trade, picks round 1, pick 21. You got pick 83. Let's just, because then it jumps all the way to 123, and that's a little outside the peripheral. But talking about those two picks, do you think they're in a spot where they need to come out of this with something at a position? Like, example, the Browns feel like probably need to come out of this with something at running back because there's just nothing there, or safety. Is that the vibe about any spots on the roster currently?
Yeah, I mean, I defensive tackle would be one for me. I mean, they've got some flexibility with Keanu Benton. He's a guy that's played nose. I actually think he's better at home. Is probably a 3 tech. So it gives you some flexibility on the guys that you can look at. There hasn't maybe been as much interest there in the top name guys, which kind of does lead me to believe that some other positions are on the board in round 1, and it's not necessarily a thing. I do think if Derek Harmon from Oregon is there at 21, a guy just that fits the bill of like what they look for in a 3 technique. He's long, he's pretty stout, he can hold up against the run. It's difficult to move him off his spot. Has the good first step quickness to kind of gap shoot and get into the backfield. Some tightness in his lower half in terms of like that prevents him from being a high-level finisher, but he is really disruptive. I see them being interested in him in the first round. And then, like, even if they do wait, that's one of the nice things. You mentioned running back. Steelers kind of in the same boat there, but running back, defensive tackle are two positions in this draft where I think there's going to be legitimate starters, like starting caliber players that go in the 4th round just because of how many depth. I mean, I've got over a dozen defensive tackles in the top 100 of my big board. I have 9 running backs and like a bunch of early day 3 grades. So it's a good position. Even if you don't come away with that in the first round, like there's going to be a plethora of different kind of flavors to choose from as we move on.
Agreed, man. I reference in these conversations Dane's recent, mock draft, just because I think his 7-rounder, no trades, just straight up picking players where he thinks they fit based on his study of guys and his study of rosters. Now he's got a controversial pick. He's got Shador going to you guys at 21. Obviously, that's a bit of a surprise given some of the connection there. But then there's also the Dylan Sampson part of it. And I like Sampson young. We've gone through this on our side. And I know you're talking they're going to be looking at backs on day 3. But what I'm talking about is that 21. Is there a strong enough connection you feel like to get to 21 and take Shador, or do you feel like somebody like Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe is a little more up their alley?
Yeah, to me, it does, just because of how they handled 2022. They've showed a lot of interest, but they weren't at the pro days for guys like Jackson Dart. Like they were there, but not the top shot callers, Khan,
Right,
Tomlin,
right.
the real decision makers. I think they like
Was
those
there
guys.
one of those where Aaron Rodgers had visited during one of them? I can't remember if I'm right on that. I could be
There,
off.
there was, but I think that was during the Michigan Pro Day.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah,
Yep.
that was something that happened. It will be interesting to see maybe the Shadur thing, because he did visit later in the process. Maybe they just kind of got wind that maybe the rest of the league kind of maybe views him a little bit lower. I think that's been a common kind of consensus. I know you've done a lot of work on Shadur, just like studying his game. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on him as a player. But for me, the cliff notes of his scouting report is like the unflappable toughness. I love that about him. I think he's extremely competitive. I think that when he was given the opportunity to work NFL level concepts, like he can cycle through progressions. He can read defenses. Like I thought coverage rotations didn't give him as much trouble as I could. They do see a lot of funky stuff with Travis Hunter on their team. And then just like the big selling point I think everybody talks about, just like the sharpshooter accuracy. Like the ball hardly ever hits the ground the first and second level. Like when he's on time and his base is clean, he could really get it there to guys on stride. So Shadur to me is more of a second round player, but in this class without a lot of blue chip talent, not a lot of first round grades. If they took him at 21, it's not going to like send me into a panic like when they took Kenny Pickett at 20th overall or whatever in 2022.
Yeah, no doubt. I am echoing and have echoed a lot of what you said there about Shador in terms of, his willingness to stand in that offense was not doing him many
Horrific.
favors to make life easy the way you compare to some of the other prospects in the class. But I think, again, why I go middle first round, kind of in your position, 15 sort of the earliest, 21 is where I start to see it making sense into the late first. And then you never know what happens with second round picks and teams trying to fill needs and sort of where they see positional fall off happening. I do think he fits really well there. I do think the physical limitations of seeing the nature in which the speed in which he has to see it because of the arm strength does play a pretty big role for him.
Absolutely.
But again, the right offense, I mean, you get this guy where he's like, oh man, we're playing in an offense where teams have to honor Jaylen Warren, or they had to honor, whoever in the backfield and make that happen. Then I get a little bit more of a wiggle room. That window gets a little bigger, that rollout gets a little cleaner, that movement in the pocket gets a little easier to do. That stuff can go a long way. So I think it's the right spot. I will be interested because there just hasn't been the heaviest amount of public front-facing connection between the two. That does not necessarily mean that doesn't happen, because not everything has to be reported to the copy paste boys, like I say. So listen, a couple things I like to hit on before we get out the door is like, obviously you have a setup. What we do is we got like, hey, they need a running back in this spot. Typically you find yourself taking a running back here, a tight end here for us, or whatever. I think it's interesting to look at like maybe a position that would surprise you. Like, hey, they feel good about the O-line, but do you think like they would be looking at a guard? I mean, like defensive, like you said, they feel like they're pretty content in the secondary, but is there a spot where you feel like they might BPA a player at this position, even though on paper they feel good about it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the guys that they've shown probably the most interest in throughout the process, was kind of being interesting, is Nick Emanwori, defensive back from South Carolina. He's a guy who's played a lot in the slot. They do have a really big need in the slot, but over the past several years, they've kind of just hand waved that and kind of, just put a stopgap option there, if you will. Emanwori could be this type of chess piece. They had a lot of interest in Jeremy Chin coming out last year. That's actually who I compare Emanwori's kind of game to. Really linear athlete, but good straight line speed, has some ball production, which is usually something that the Steelers value, but physical freak. I think that the Steelers, depending on how the board looks at 21, if Shadur's on the board there, or whoever else, specifically I already mentioned Derek Harmon, they could be a team that wants to trade back just to acquire another day 2 pick, because a lot of their visits, and the Steelers, 5 of the guys that they drafted last year and an undrafted free agent came in for a visit. It's a heavy correlation between who they're really interested in. They don't do smoke screens. I think they want another day 2 pick. If they get another day 2 pick, could they add another wide receiver? Could they add another cornerback? Maybe a guy like Trey Amos, Azareye'h Thomas from Florida State, that kind of is a good scheme fit with his length and press man ability. So I think that those positions aren't necessarily being talked about a lot with the Steelers, wide receiver, cornerback, but they do make a lot of sense, at least to me, along with defensive tackle, running back, quarterback.
So your vibe is that you don't think they would mind getting out of 21 down anywhere 7 to 10 picks and gaining something maybe in the 50s or something like that.
Yeah, so they did this the first year, Khan, and it's difficult because we're working on a small sample size. Tomlin's the head man in the building, but Khan is the general manager. Andy Whitehall's came over. So it's only the third draft as a trio. They did this in 2023 where they actually moved back in the third round to pick up some extra draft capital on day 3 because they had a long stretch without picks. They traded back and still got Darnell Washington in the third round. I could see them trying to do the same thing. Now, the tricky part is this isn't a draft that has a lot of first-round players. There's a lot of guys in that 15 to 50 range that I think have generally close grades. So who's going to be willing to come up? That is kind of where like teams like the Browns, maybe the Giants, if they pass on the quarterback in the first round, could they be willing to come up? You don't see inter-division trades a lot, but I do think that there will be some team, maybe if somebody wants to come up and get Jackson Dart, that would be my preference, to be honest with you, because you could go back to the start of the second round. You lose the 5th-year option, but you could probably still get another top 75 pick and maybe a little bit more on top of that. So, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, it feels like that would be, you can there's a lot of division trades that happen later, but if you do one in the first round, where say you let, ultimate turn of twist of fate kind of thing here, where you did let Cleveland come up to 21 and they took a quarterback who ended up working out, living that down.
Absolutely.
Versus like him going to the NFC to the Giants is a little bit different scenario to play out. But no, that's interesting. It is a spot. I think there's a select few spots, Pittsburgh, Minnesota, who's short on picks. 29, I think, is the Commanders, who are short on picks collectively. So those are a little bit of the spots. But I do think, man, we haven't seen much movement, and we haven't seen any movement leading up to the draft. And it does get hard for me to envision teams with this much uncertainty across the board, then all of a sudden getting super, hungry on draft night to move up a couple spots. But hey, there are going to be teams willing to chat. Before we get out the door, we appreciate this much. That is your shot. Like, call it who you think they're taking. Since they don't have a second round, it's hard to pick in the third round, but we'll give you extra credit if you nail the third round pick, but at least try to give us that first round pick you think they're going to go with.
Yeah, I think I'm going to lean towards Derek Harmon out of Oregon. I'm just not really sure if he's there because I'm looking at Daniel Jeremiah's big board and Dane Brugler's
our Cincy guest said that exact name, so it is
really
a little spicy. What do you feel about Walter Nolan? Because that feels like the next in line in that conversation.
Walter Nolan's DT1 for me in the class. So I am pretty high on Walter Nolan. I just think that the combination of like raw strength, the agility, the quick twitch, I'm a big fan. I think that there's been some red flags over him. The people I talked to, a couple of scouts in Indianapolis at the combine, very mixed opinions. The Steelers didn't bring him in for a pre-draft visit. They were at his pro day, did meet with him obviously at the Senior Bowl and the combine, but that one would kind of surprise me. Just the lack of interest kind of scares me off. But I'll still probably say Harmon. The quarterbacks that I think that they would really be interested in, I think that they could just go before they have the chance to pick them. And I think that if he's still there and they haven't taken a quarterback, I think they'll take Will Howard in the third round.
Okay, that would be a pretty big connection, Ohio State, over that direction. Is there anyone you don't want? Like, if they take this guy at 21, you're going to be rolling your eyes about?
I think Eamon Worry at 21 is a little bit rich for my blood personally. I do understand it, but I do think that he has a lot of he's what I call a theory player. In theory, he could probably be, I've heard that term used. I think Trevor Sikkema used that a couple months ago and I kind of stole it. But he's a theory type of player where I see the vision. It's just hard for me to kind of get there in my brain to process it. I would also say Jackson Dart. I don't really think, I already mentioned the Shadur thing at 21 is something that I could rationalize. Dart is more of like a late second, early third round player for me. So that would be kind of like we're trending in Kenny Pickett territory in terms of like reaches. So that would be another one that I would be pretty disappointed about. Yeah,
this sort of discrepancy between what the buzz is around Dart versus what some think he's actually going to be is going to be fascinating to track. Listen, tell people where they can find you before we get out the door, man.
Yep, at Steelers_DB on Twitter and YouTube. That's where you can find all my Steelers and NFL draft content. And then all my written works, Pittsburgh Sports Now, Steelers Now.
Fantastic stuff, man. One of the best follows if you're looking to cover what's going on in the rest of the division. Give Derek your time. We thank him for that as well. And all right, Derek, we'll be right back, man. Thanks again.
Appreciate it, man.
All right, that's it for today. Thanks to Jake. Thanks to Derek for stopping by. Great episode. Thought they covered it well. We'll have a Ravens guest on. We'll have that over the weekend, cover that, continue our top 10s, at least offensive positions, and then some of the key focal point defensive positions I want to get to, and then kind of cover maybe releasing my top 50 big board. I'll get to that as well. So a lot of great stuff coming. Thanks for everybody stopping by today. Join, support, subscribe, do all those things you can to support BrownsFilmBreakdown.com. You guys are the best. And if you haven't come over and joined us, take advantage of the opportunity to give us a trial period and see what you think. So again, thanks for being here. Have a fantastic Friday and into your weekend, everybody. I'll catch you on the next podcast. Until then, go Browns.